I'm the chairman and the founder of the Barrett Values Center, and our mission is to put values at the heart of how people live and work. And our vision is to create a world which is driven by values. So 20 years ago, or just over, I invented something called the Cultural Transformation Tools, and at that time, or just prior to that time, I was working in the World Bank, and I realized that I had to give up my work. I was in my 40s, and I was a transportation engineer, and I was suddenly very bored with my life, and I realized I needed to become a transformation engineer. And so I invented a way of measuring consciousness by mapping values, and these are called the Cultural Transformation Tools. So these are powerful metrics that help organizations to transform. And some of you may have seen my book, The Values-Driven Organization. It's here in French, but it's also in many other languages too. I'm just back from Brazil, where we've been talking about the same subject. All over the world, people are talking about values-driven organizations. So what are the cultural transformation tools? Well, there are tools for measuring who you are as an individual and as a leader, and there are tools for measuring organizations. How are they working? What works and what doesn't work in the organization? And they're very profound in the depth of information that they provide. So today, my agenda is to talk about what is culture, why it's important, and how do you build a values-driven organization.
So what is culture? Culture is about the values and beliefs that guide the behaviors and define how an organization operates. And who creates the culture? Anybody know? Who creates the culture? The people? No. The leaders create the culture. The culture of an organization is a reflection of leadership consciousness. Therefore, if you want to change the culture, what do? The leaders must change, or you must change the leaders. I mean, it's that easy and that difficult. It's not easy, but that's really what it's all about. The culture is a reflection of leadership consciousness. And you must all do something else. You must rewrite all of the systems, processes, because embedded in these systems and processes are the values of previous leaders. Okay? And so if you want to change the culture and you change the leaders or the leaders change, you have to change the incentives too. And the incentives are all in the systems, policies, and procedures. So that can take quite a while to do. You have to go back and look at everything that's written and change it so it's in alignment with the future that you want to create as a leader. So let's talk about the importance of culture. I wrote 20 years ago, the book that you have in French was originally called Liberating the Corporate Soul. And I was writing at that time about the importance of culture. Well, 15 years later, Deloitte suddenly realized that it was important, and so did PwC and Ernst & Young. So according to Deloitte, culture has become one of the most important business topics of 2016. CEOs and HR leaders now recognize that culture drives people's behavior, innovation, and customer service. 82% of Deloitte survey respondents believe that culture is a potentially competitive advantage. What I was saying over 20 years ago. Culture is the new frontier of competitive advantage. According to PwC, 84% of leaders believe that culture is critical to their organization's success. 60% think culture is more important than their strategy. In fact, some people believe that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, certainly not an English breakfast, but anyhow. Okay, so according to Ernst & Young, 55% of the FTSE 350 companies have seen a 10% increase in their operating profits driven by their investment in culture. And overall, 92% of the board members of these companies said that a focus on culture has improved their financial performance. So culture is fundamentally linked to financial importance and financial success. And we're going to explore in a few moments why and how that is. Lastly, however, this is a graph showing the proportion that the intangibles and the tangibles of an organization contribute to the stock price. And in 1975, 17% of the intangibles, like culture, contributed to the stock price. Now it's 84%. Again, we see things like culture, innovation, and creativity contribute massively to the success of an organization. Oh, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Peter Drucker said that. But I also like this. This man, Luther Johnson, he said, no matter how far-reaching the vision or how brilliant the strategy, neither will be realized if it's not supported by the organizational culture. You can have a brilliant strategy, but if you've got a weak culture, it will not happen. So what is the conclusion? Cultural capital is, I believe, a new frontier of competitive advantage. And how do you build cultural capital? Well, you do it by becoming what Robert Keegan calls a deliberately developmental organization. I'm going to spend a few moments talking about what is a deliberately developmental organization. It's an organization built around the simple but radical conviction that an organization will best prosper when it's more deeply aligned with the people's strongest motivation. What is your strongest motivation? Our strongest motivation, after we've got survival, safety, and security taken care of, is to grow. Everybody in your organization wants to grow. They want to get better and be promoted and move on and reach higher levels in the organization. They want to grow. This means building an organizational culture where supporting people's development is woven into the fabric or the working life and the regular operations and their daily routines and conversations. When you help employees to grow, they become engaged. Highly engaged employees have wonderful qualities. They identify with the company. They care passionately about what the company cares about. They bring their passion and purpose to work. They love to get up on Monday morning and go to work. They hate it when Friday comes. They're willing to invest their discretionary energy. What is discretionary energy? It's the energy that we have which we can decide what to do with at the end of the day. And so they're so excited about the work that they're doing that they'll think about things when they go home, and they'll even have dreams about it. The next day they come into work full of inspiration. Welcome to my life. I confess, every morning around 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, I wake up. I'm very awake. And my soul, Lam, is telling me things. It's telling me what I need to do that day, what books to write, what to put in the books. If I'm working on something in detail, it tells me exactly what I need to do. Now, we don't talk about that in organizations very much, but we should. Because when you have passion and purpose in your life, where does it come from? It comes from the innermost part of who you are. That's why I called my first book, Liberating the Corporate Soul. We have to liberate the souls of our employees. Talk more about that in a moment. So highly engaged employees, they want the company to do the right thing, so ethics is important. They want to feel pride in the way the company behaves, and they are committed and loyal, and that's what we want from our employees. So why are deliberately developmental organizations the most successful? Because they care about the needs of their employees. And they also care about the needs of their stakeholders. So what are employees' needs? They're not all the same. They're quite different, and I'm going to explain why. The needs that you have are related to the stage of psychological development you are at. Okay? I'm going to go through the 7 stages of psychological development. The first 3 stages occur up to the age of about 24, okay? So we don't employ those people usually, but nevertheless, what they learn during those stages of development can handicap them or allow them the freedom to become the best versions of themselves they can become. So here are the 7 stages. It's a personal journey. Everybody in this room is on this journey. Everybody in Paris is on this journey. Everybody on the planet is on this journey. It starts with survival. It moves on, then that's the surviving stage. Then the conforming stage from about 2 to 8. And then the differentiating stage from about 8 to 24. During these 3 periods, the mind and the brain are growing. Up to the age of 2, you only have a reptilian mind-brain. At 2, the limbic mind-brain becomes dominant. That's the emotional mind. And at the age of 8, the neocortex begins to click in. But it is not fully developed until you are early 20s. This is why, anybody have teenagers, by the way? Yeah, they do stupid things because they don't have a fully developed neocortex. Maybe you did stupid things that I did, I know. It's because my brain hadn't fully developed, but my mind hadn't fully developed. And so by the time we get to 24, only then do we have a fully developed mind-brain. And then we move to the individuating stage. More about that in a moment. But that's when we begin to break away from home and find freedom. The freedom to be who we are. And then in our 40s, we move into the self-actualizing stage where we're looking for meaning and purpose. And in the 50s, we're looking to integrate that meaning and purpose into everything that we do so we can make a difference in the world. But you can't make a difference unless you can connect. So connecting is fundamental in the 50s in order to make a difference. And if you were a little boy, age 2 to 8, you might have been told, don't be soft, don't cry, don't show your emotions. Basically, shutting down feelings. By the time you get to 50, when it's time to connect, lost cause. Don't know how to. My feelings have been shut down. In another book I've written, I link these stages to the leading causes of death. For men, prostate cancer starts in the late 50s. It's an inability to connect at that level, to connect with people, and it's linked to the chakra system. People heard about the chakra system? The stages of development are linked directly to the chakra system. It's not in this book that I talk about in business. It's in another book called A New Psychology of Human Wellbeing. And lastly, we're moving to the stage of serving. This is where I am right now. It's a lot of fun serving people because at this stage, hopefully, you're living from this higher place where you really don't care anymore. You just do what you love to do. You have joy in your life doing what you love to do. No attachment to outcomes, just loving what you do. So surviving, okay. 0 to 2, staying alive. That's the motivation of these young children with only with a reptilian mind brain. And then it's about getting your basic physiological needs met. And you need to manage your environment. Now, you see, when the baby cries, it's unhappy, it's in instability, and so it needs attention. And when the baby doesn't get that attention, it feels it can't control the outside world. It doesn't know anything about the outside world. It's living in a sense of oneness, but when it feels uncomfortable and makes some gesture, and that gesture then relieves the problem it has, it feels it's in control of the world. So when you get older and you micromanage your employees, it's because you never felt in control. You never got your needs met at that early stage of development. And then we move to the conforming stage, from 3 to 7 years old. The limbic mind brain, the emotional mind brain is dominant. It's about keeping safe, learning to be loved, and feeling accepted and belonging. This is also a very important stage for later because, this, as I mentioned, this links through to the integrating stage in your 50s. Differentiating, teenagers, 8 to 24. Well, that's beyond teenage. It's all about feeling secure. It's about being recognized and being seen, not just by your parents, but by your peers, those around you, so that you feel like, I am secure in this environment. You need to be part of a group. Now, you notice that, or you will have noticed that very often, more and more, unfortunately, young boys in their mid-teens, take guns and go and shoot people in their schools because they're not being recognized. They're loners. They're not part of a group. And they want to say, look at me, I'm here. I'm here. They've not been seen. It's fundamentally important. Now we move to this. Now this is where you may have your employees. This is the 25 to 39. It's about individuating. It's about releasing your fears, being responsible and accountable for your life, and finding freedom and autonomy to be who you are outside of your parental conditioning. Very often people move away from home, not just to be independent, but to get away from their parents who are too crowding. You need to find out who you are, and you need to separate, in a sense, from your culture, because you've been totally integrated into your culture and totally integrated into your parental life, and that is, it's not who you are. You have to find out who you really are behind all of these beliefs, and you have to remove the mask that you've been wearing to get your needs met, so you can be fully who you are and be ready to fly, to move to the next stage, which is about self-actualization. It's about self-expression. We talk very often about finding meaning and purpose. That's the ego's interpretation of this stage of development. I'm not saying the ego is bad, the ego is great, but the fears of the ego, that's what handicaps us. So the ego is looking at this stage and saying, need to find meaning and purpose. And the soul is saying, just need to self-express. It's all about self-expression. Who are you? What is it you want to express in the world? Because in an organization, if you can harness that self-expression, you're going to harness a tremendous force within your organization. I'm going back to this deliberately developmental organization. How are you in your organization recognizing these people at different stages and meeting their needs? Now comes the 50s. Connecting. Unconditional loving relationships. Desire to make a difference. And then finally, serving, contributing. At this age, you just want to contribute. You don't care about anything else. You don't need to have your self-esteem patted on the, you need patting on the back. You just want to be able to contribute to a better world. So these are the 7 stages of psychological development. So what motivates employees is the satisfaction of their needs, because each stage has different needs, and whatever you need is what you value, and that's the link to the values-driven organization. Whatever you need is what you value. And it depends on where you are in the spectrum of evolution. So these are the main needs that you need to think about. You've got employees 25 to 39 years old. They want freedom to explore who they are and seek opportunities and challenges to be accountable. They want to find out what they're good at and what they're not so good at. So if they make mistakes, you don't want to come down on them with a heavy hand. You say, okay, we learned something there. Time to move on. So, and then in the 40s, it's about fully expressing your unique gift to the world, being who you really are and contributing. And when you do that, creativity flows through you because you're living in spirit. You're living from the level of the soul when you are living fully at this level. It's amazing to see. And there are more and more young people who are, they're not at this level, but they have this impulse already, early in their lives. And then the 50 to 59-year-olds who want to make a difference, they want to connect so they can make that difference in the world. So we grow in stages, okay? And we operate at levels. So I can be at the 4th stage of development, the individuating stage, and I can lose all my money, and my wife runs off with a younger man. I've lost everything. I move down to the survival level of consciousness. I'm at the integrating stage of development, but I move down to the survival level of consciousness. Do you get the link? So normally, the level of consciousness we're operating from will be the same as the stage of development we're at. But if we've got some fears from those first 3 stages, they will trip us up and pull us down into those lower levels. And it's the fears of those levels that keep us anchored there. Now, Donald Trump is a perfect example of this. No, he is. He had a really tough childhood. He didn't get his survival needs met. He didn't get his relationship needs met in that second period, the conforming state. And he didn't get his differentiating needs met. And so he's constantly looking for that reinforcement. And he can't individuate because his mind has been programmed to get those needs met. And this occurs in our organizations. And sometimes the top management are people who got there by bullying and by doing all sorts of wonderful things which are fear-driven, and they think that works. But the people underneath know it doesn't work because the culture they create is toxic. People are fed up with that. Time we moved on. So levels of consciousness. There are 7 levels of... Here you see now the model, the 7 levels of consciousness model. These are the different primary motivations at each level. I won't go over them because I've really just talked about them. But at each level of consciousness, employees need different things. At the first level, we need to have a decent salary. We need to work in a healthy organization. At the second level, we need friendship. We need people who we work with, who we get along with. At the third level, we want opportunities to grow professionally with support and feedback. At the fourth level, we want to feel this sense of personal growth. We know we're on a journey now, and we want freedom and autonomy. And then we move into the self-actualizing level, where we're looking for meaning and purpose, and so on. So, how do you transform an organization to be this type of organization? Well, the first thing you have to do is measure it and use the cultural transformation tools, but I'll come on to that later. I don't have too much time left because I want to give some room to Arno. Arno's going to talk about that. He's going to talk about actual example of what to do. So cultural transformation is about creating a culture that addresses employees' needs. And it begins with the leadership team. If there isn't a commitment to transformation, it's not going to happen. And that means a commitment to personal transformation amongst the leadership group. Organizations don't transform. No, they don't. People do, particularly the leadership group. So without this commitment to personal transformation amongst the leadership group, you're wasting your time, frankly. It's not going to happen. So it's quite usual, even when the leader is committed and several other people are committed, there'll be one or two people who are not committed, and that will be the crunch point, because then they say, well, you know, this is what we're going. If it's too scary for you, leave. But you need commitment. So what's the difference between transformation and change? Because we often talk about change programs and transformation programs. Well, now we understand there's a hierarchy of consciousness and development. We can understand the difference. Change is doing things differently. It's a shift in behaviors. It's more productive, more efficient. Transformation is a new way of being, a shift in values. You can change without transforming, and many people do, but you cannot transform without changing. We cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking that we created them. So a new level of thinking is a new level of consciousness and a new way of being. So change happens horizontally at these different levels, whereas transformation is a shift. And using the cultural transformation tools, we can find out what are the values of employees, their personal values, what values they see in the organization, and what values they'd like to see in the organization. And the difference between these three sets of values gives us the pathway to growth, the pathway to increase our performance. So organizations that don't transform, people do. I'll never get tired of saying it. I've been saying it for 20 years. And it begins with the personal transformation of the leaders. So how do we do it? Well, we use the cultural transformation tools to map the values. We find out, we ask 3 questions. It's the only survey I know that only has 3 questions. The first question is, what are your personal values? So they employees pick from a list of about 80 or 90 words. What are their personal values? And then they pick a set of values about how the organization operates. It's a slightly different list because it contains words like bureaucracy, etc., which are not in the first list. And then we ask the employees, well, what would it take for your organization to become a high-performing organization? So we've got personal values, current culture, desired culture. And every list template of values is customized for your organization. Okay, so it uses the language of your organization. And out of that, we ask one more question at the front, like a series of questions, like which department are you in? What level are you in? Male, female, what age are you? So we can slice the data into all of these different ways of looking at things. So it's important as you think about this to understand, well, what are values? Well, you're asking people to pick 10 values from a list. What are values? I used to say it's a shorthand way of describing our individual and collective motivations, what's important to us. But these days, I say something different. These are the energetic drivers of our aspirations and intentions. So when you get a group of people and sit around and start talking about your values, if we were to have a chat about our values, I say to you, what's your most important value? And you say, da-da-da-da-da. And I say, yeah, mine's that too. And I also have da-da-da-da-da. We're now into a level of conversation which is meaningful. And we feel excited. And we feel close to each other because we just shared information which is vitally important to our lives. And we feel closer. So the values-driven organization is one where people feel close because they're constantly talking about their values and the values of the organization. Now, there are 2 types of value. Well, there are many different ways we can categorize, but I like to talk about positive values and potentially limiting values. So positive values, trust, creativity, passion, honesty, integrity. And then there are potentially limiting values, such as bureaucracy, power, blame, greed, hierarchy. So why are these values? Okay, they're fear-driven, that's for a start. They're fear-driven. But why do you call them values? Because if they weren't valuable at some level of our consciousness, we wouldn't behave in ways that look like this. We wouldn't blame other people unless it was valuable to us. But which part of us is it valuable to? To the ego. To the fears of the ego. Internal competition, power, blame. They're all fear-driven values, and they create something which I'll talk about in a moment called cultural entropy. It's the degree of dysfunction in the system. So how do we do the survey and we place values by level. So this is an example of 100 employees. This is the current culture that we ask these 100 employees, what are the top 10 values of your organization? And 59 people here said tradition. And it's potentially limiting because it can block innovation. And they said diversity. You see, every time I bring up a value, isn't that neat? It goes into a level of consciousness. Every value belongs to a level of consciousness. And the white dots are the limiting ones, and the blue dots are the positive ones. So as we build up the top 10 values of this organization, we now have a map of consciousness. We can see that there are limiting values at each of the first 3 levels. That's the survival level, the relationship level, and the self-esteem level. And we know exactly what they are, because at the survival level, number 3, is control. At the relationship level, at level 2, it's, which one is it? Number 1, tradition. And at number 3, 8, it's image. But incidentally, that's one of Donald Trump's top values. I'm sorry to keep coming back to that, but I read his book on leadership, and I mapped his values. And then I did a blog about his values, and it's the most downloaded blog I think I've ever written. It's had like 15,000 hits. But it describes Donald Trump's character perfectly. So then we can place values by levels. So let's say we've got the top 10 values now, but we had 100 employees, they all had 10 votes. That's 1,000 votes. We can distribute those votes across each level, and we can see, well, which were the levels of consciousness where the most votes, and where did the limiting values appear? These are the red lines here. Now, when we add up the percentage of votes for those limiting values, we find something called cultural entropy. It's the degree of dysfunction in the system. It's the key number that the CEO looks at every year when he does a cultural values assessment. It's the first thing he looks at, because every year, as you bring down the level of cultural entropy, every other positive indicator increases. Income increases, engagement increases, as entropy comes down. So I'm just going to finish by showing you quickly a couple of assessment results. This is Team A. So on the left, you see the top 10 values of these 19 people. And in the middle, you see the values they chose as their current culture. And on the right, you see the values they would like to see. And what you see is alignment. Really great alignment with many matching values between the personal and the current. There are 4. Between the current and the desired, there are 6. And between the personal and desired, there are also 4. So this is what we call aligned organization, and the level entropy is only 7%. Anything below 10% is brilliant. And if you take the inverse of entropy, you can call it cultural health. So this would be 93% cultural health. Now let's look at Team B. Notice the difference. The values on the personal values are very similar, but look at all those white dots. These are the limiting values. Confusion, long hours, short-term focus, blame, information hoarding, manipulation, hierarchy. Any of you work in that organization? Do you know these values in your organization? They are limiting values. They create toxicity. And look at the desired cultural values. You see they're all at level 4, the level of transformation. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 values at the transformation level, because this is the answer to all of these limiting values that you see in the current culture. So, and what level of entropy? 47%. So this is an extremely dysfunctional organization. So I've shown you a little bit of the stages of development, understanding employees' needs. When their needs met in the organization, you get this alignment. When their needs are not met, you don't get the alignment. In 2008, in July, not only do we do these cultural values assessment in thousands of organizations in 90 different countries, well, we started doing it in nations. We mapped the values of Iceland. We've got the values of 27 nations now. This year we did France, Brazil, we're doing Canada, Slovakia. So we mapped the values of nations. So the level of cultural entropy in Iceland in 2008, in August, was 52%. I couldn't believe it. And when I looked at the detail, I said, wow, they've got lots of leadership issues. There's all this different stuff going on. So I went to Iceland the first week of September in 2008. And I said to the people in the public seminars, I said, if you were an organization, you'd be going bankrupt about now because you've got so much cultural entropy. Now remember, Iceland is the #1 democratic country in the world, so that's why I was shocked. So I said, yes, you'd be going bankrupt about now if you were an organization. 2 weeks later, Iceland went bankrupt. Thank you very much.